we have a few questions. There was a question about coroutines. What do you think about coroutines? Do you have a plan to add coroutine support into POCO?
I don't have specific plans yet, but I have, let's say, I have some ideas what could be done with coroutines. But yeah, one of the problems, of course, that I have is lots of ideas, but not so much time to do things. But it's definitely something that we are thinking about. It's actually, I guess, the same topic that we have with a lot of things that are coming to C++ now, because what people probably noticing, a lot of the new features that are coming to C++ are kind of very low level and very, would say, hard to use. And so, for example, one of the things that I had to deal with was this new time zone support in C++ 20, which is like, not really very developer friendly. So basically you have to first have a PhD like in time zone theory in order to use it. And one of the ideas is also to have some easier to use classes on top of that. And I think the same is probably true for coroutines, which, you need to have something built on top of it to make it usable.
Yeah, I mean, there has been coroutine support like in Boost before the standard. Yeah. But if you like actually want to explicitly support what's in the standard, that will be a lot of work. And maybe with more upcoming standards, it will be better. You mentioned network programming. So someone asked, like, curl is still the most popular library. How do you compare POCO with curl, especially for HTTPS, TLS related use cases? Does POCO support all the lower level capabilities as curl?
I think for HTTPS, we are pretty much on par, except for HTTP2 support, which we currently don't have. But as I mentioned before, it is planned for the near future. So I think with the POCO HTTP client, you can do all that you need to do, like for HTTP. Of course, curl has some support for a couple of other protocols probably that we don't have in POCO, but at least on the HTTP side, I think there is not much that you could maybe do with curl that you cannot do with POCO.
And from LinkedIn, there's a question about, like, do you support like more database modeling oriented ways, or is it just database classes in POCO?
Yeah, this is actually this active record library that is relatively new in POCO. I built it a couple of years ago. So it basically implements this active record pattern from, I think there was a book called Patterns of Enterprise Architecture or something like that. But it's a very simple, lightweight way of doing things. So I did not want to build like a huge ORM framework that you might find in Java or .NET Word. I wanted to have something lightweight that just covers basically the most basic usage. So basically give me an object with a certain ID, or give me a list of all objects with a certain ID. And the way this works basically is you have a configuration file or an XML file where you basically specify your database schema. And we then have a small code generator basically that generates C++ classes out of that, and also basically the most basic queries. And then, you can basically do that. And of course, it's built on top of the POCO data library. So it works with different databases like MySQL and Postgres and SQLite. and ODPC.
More general question on how are you, like, comparison of or advantages you think with respect to some IP protocol?
Actually, the SUM IP protocol would be just another protocol that can be implemented with the POCO remoting framework, and this is actually what we did for a customer. So basically, you now have the way to specify basically your SUM IP services as C++ classes, and then basically use the underlying SUM IP serialization and data format and network protocol as an implementation basically of the remoting framework. So this is currently not publicly available because we did this for a specific customer, but and also for a specific underlying SUM IP implementation. But we are thinking about doing this in a general sense and using like, for example, vSUM IP as an underlying implementation. The problem actually that I found with all the existing SUM IP implementation is they are pretty low level. So basically they implement the basic framing of the network packets, but they don't do serialization. So you still have basically to manually build your network packets in terms of your user data. And this is something where the remoting framework saves you a lot of work because it does all the serialization for you.
Yeah. In that context, I have actually a question, because years ago I implemented stun turn for a client, or like in a client, and we found some C++ framework which supported stun turn, which was quite difficult to find, but then we had one and it was like huge, and we used like one tiny bit of it. And so it would be interesting to know, it's like, have you worked with the stun turn protocol? Is that
no, I haven't yet.
Okay. Question on licensing. Is macchina.io proprietary? Is it open source?
It's put it this way, we have like an open core model. So basically we have a version of Macchina Edge that is available under the GPL on GitHub. But we also offer a commercial version that has more features, and but also the commercial version that we offer is basically provided in source code. Actually, when I started Macchina Edge, it was actually in the beginning available under the Apache license, so it was basically free to use for everyone. But I got kind of motivated to change that after I noticed it was used in a lot of cars from different manufacturers, and it's a bit hard if you put out everything and for free, and at one point you need to find a way to also get paid for your work. But that's a common theme in open source in general, and still I think an unsolved problem.
There was a programming language question on LinkedIn. Like, why do you follow C++ and JavaScript and not like Go from the server? Or like generally?
Yeah, generally because I have been programming C++ for many years. I have built a lot of code in C++ that I can use, and I'm not really motivated in repeating the same again in a different programming language.
Right. Let me go to the next question. How do you see macchina technology capturing the edge IoT growth as it is now maturing faster?
Good question. Let's say we are working on that. As you can see, I've showed you a couple of interesting examples where macchina edge has been used. I think there is still a good market for that, because if you look at some of the other things that are around in the IoT space, or specifically in the edge space, it's a lot of stuff basically that comes from people who traditionally came from a cloud background and then discovered the edge space and basically began by downscaling what they did for cloud for edge devices. So for example, there is a framework called EdgeX that is, I think, done by the Linux Foundation, and mostly, I think, sponsored by Dell. So it's really targeted for like servers that are running on the edge and not so much for typically IoT gateways. And also, last time I checked, so the hardware requirements were at least like a minimum of 1 gigabyte of RAM, which nowadays, of course, is no longer that much of an issue as it was a couple of years ago. But as we've seen from the example from the steel mill, efficiency, I think, is still a major point, especially, for example, if you can replace your industrial PC with a much cheaper IoT gateway and do more with that. So I think that whole performance thing, efficiency thing, is where I see a C++ based solution having a lot of advantages. Also, if you go to the whole thing with machine learning at the edge, a lot of that is C++, even if it's under the hood. And of course, it's much easier to integrate C++ machine learning framework with other C++ code than with some other stuff.
True. How is your experience as an open source maintainer?
The usual, should I say, mixed bag. So I've been doing this now for 20 years, and I've seen all the things. People screaming at you because they don't want to do C++, but because they're rather Java programmers, but kind of were forced to do C++, and now they have to use your framework, and it doesn't work exactly like what they know from Java, and everything is bad. Of course, positive thing, a lot of contributions by different people. Also, one of the big issues in open source development is you have a lot of people who contribute like a huge chunk of code to a project and then lose interest in it and leave the project, and basically the remaining core maintainers end up with an increasingly bigger amount of code that has to be maintained. And also of course, everyone likes open source. And even I think if people won't admit it, the main reason people like open source is because they get free stuff. Of course, there is, and it's funny because just the last 3 days I spent at the Open Source Summit Europe, which this year took part in Vienna. So I took the opportunity and traveled there with due to the weather that we had in the last couple of days was a whole different story. And there are some interesting things happening in the open source world that I find a bit concerning in some regards. I don't know if anyone has followed the situation with the Redis database. Basically, Redis is a key value store in-memory database that's very popular in cloud environment, and also in the POCO libraries we have a Redis client. And Redis was originally developed by a guy in Italy as a single-person project, and then eventually, basically, he built it as part of a startup that he was founding, doing some other stuff, and he needed basically a key value store, a fast one. And so he started building that, and that actually became his most famous product, because the startup originally, he founded originally, went bust. And again, he was like hired by different companies like VMware and some others. And eventually there was also a company that basically started to commercialize the Redis product. And the typical way to monetize such a product is you offer it as a cloud service. The problem with offering as a cloud service is if your product is popular, then obviously AWS and Azure guys will notice it and start offering that product themselves. So you now, as a startup, find yourself getting competition from very big companies, which is not a funny situation to be. The usual way these companies then react is, we have this open source project that anyone can use, but we want to make money by offering it as a service. So how can we prevent AWS, for example, from providing it as a service? And they start doing funny things with the licensing. So it's no longer basically an open source license, but some kind of source available license. And this also what happened to Redis, I think this April or sometime around that. So basically they changed the license. And of course, the people from Amazon didn't really like that, and also some other people. So basically got together. They took the last open source version of the Redis code, forked it, and created a new product that was immediately put under the Linux Foundation. And now basically we have Velkey as a replacement for Redis. And this probably ends from the reaction that I have seen, at least there, the Redis story, probably. And the same thing happen to other things. Like there's this new open search project, which also took some other open source search engine that from one day to the other stopped being an open source engine, and so on. And a huge topic still is how do open source maintainer actually getting paid. So it's basically, with the situation with POCO is it's basically a couple of smaller companies like my company or Alex company doing the main part of the work. Occasionally we get to do paid work, like for example Siemens paid us some money to implement certain features in POCO, which was a nice thing. And of course, we have some contributors that work at larger companies that also contribute some code. So yeah, it's sometimes as occasionally, like with everyone, every other work, from time to time it gets a bit frustrating, and you're wondering why you're doing that, and then also
so
it's fun.
I think that's like a topic that we can go on. But I thought like it would be nice to just follow up with like how does your commercial offering look? I mean, you talked about that it's. I know it's difficult to get funding for open source, and I know the Qt licensing and what they do. Like they have like a device license and an application developer license. And
Basically, we have a very simple licensing. So we have different packages basically that we offer. The one is the simpler one is called POCO Pro, which is just the remoting and the OSP libraries, and this is typically targeted at companies that are not doing strictly IoT things. So we have a lot of companies doing Windows applications, this kind of stuff, or server applications. And this is basically a one-time license fee, and you get basically the source code and can do as you wish, so to say. And then typically for Macchina Edge, we have a similar licensing agreement, although we try to find a licensing agreement or a payment scheme that kind of works with the customer, so that there is no fixed pricing. It's more like how many devices do you want to put Macchina, or do you want to put Macchina into, and then we try to find an agreement.
Yeah, I understand you have an interest to, so like when we talk about IoT, Edge, C++, etc., like security becomes more important. I thought like we should talk about that a little bit. Like, do you like run your own fuzzing, or have you had?
For POCO, we don't run our own fuzzing, but POCO is now run as part of the Google. What's it called? Fuzzing thing. So.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. Also, they already found a couple of issues there, which we are usually trying to fix as quickly as possible. But so far, nothing real serious has been found. And usually, the main security issues that we have to deal with are often in the C libraries that we embed as part of POCO. So for example, in the last recent years, a lot of issues in the export parser have come up. So we closely following their releases and try to incorporate their patches as soon as possible. And of course, in POCO itself, we try to do things the right way. So be very conservative with regards to working with pointers. So generally, we use smart pointers wherever possible. And we also have like our own buffer class that does some edge, some buffer overflow checking kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think like having the primitives right, and you said that you had smart pointers before they were in the standard.
And then we also do the usual stuff like running the test suites with all the sanitizers and this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We try, as usual, we try to do the best as we can, but of course, our resources are limited, so we cannot probably do all that we should do, but we try to do our best.
But Google helps, of course.
Yeah.
So, regarding to macchina Edge, there's a question like, what are the main competitive options to your offering?
I think if you look at the C++ world, there is not much that is out there. Of course, there are some frameworks that other languages that use other languages like HX, and also the Linux Foundation has some lightweight stuff. I don't remember the name, but I think it's something that is written in C or something like that. And then there is also another project. I also don't have the name in my head, that is written in either Go or Rust. I don't remember.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, it's not that much that is out there in terms of of course, there is a lot of libraries that cover one aspect of what Macchina does. So, for example, there are libraries that help you with talking to PLCs and stuff like that. And
okay. LinkedIn asks, do you plan to have some AI stuff in macchina Edge SDK?
Probably not directly in macchina Edge, because what I have seen is with the work that I've come in contact with in the AI space is very few AI projects are as simple as taking a neural network library and training a simple neural network and integrating it. The real interesting stuff is a lot more complicated. Generally, I'd say there are plenty of C++ frameworks or libraries for AI stuff already out there, and it's not too hard to integrate them with Macchina. So I see no special need to have any specific AI features in Macchina.
Yeah, it's an interesting and good argument that this basically is, on the client side, not like on your framework side. How is it like with the integration of macchina into the customer development environment? Are they available as libraries and via API integration and customer source code?
From an integration perspective, it's basically a set of libraries that you can integrate. And there are actually different ways that you can use Macchina. The easiest way is you basically take the entire Macchina package and compile it and build it, and then you have something, as we have seen in my demo, basically, that already gives you something. And then you can build basically the libraries, can use the libraries basically to build your own bundles or your own extensions, your own services, and deploy them alongside with Macchina. But what you also can do is you can just take some of the libraries from Macchina that you need and completely build your own environment. So it's really very flexible from that perspective.
Yeah. We already talked about security, but there's like a specific question about, with the advent of more cybersecurity risks, how data security integrity is maintained in the communication with your stack.
There is no specific thing here. I mean, we do the usual stuff like using encrypted connections, HTTPS, or if you use MQTT, you have MQTT over TLS. But there is no specific thing that we do in the Macchina framework for encryption, because this is typically handled at the protocol level.
But as far as I understand, POCO is part of macchina, so and POCO does support encryption, so you could implement encryption for the critical things you want to encrypt and not trust the transport layer of encryption. Which I think brings us to the end. Thank you very much for being our guest today and giving this awesome talk.
It was a pleasure.
And with that, I think we're going to end the stream.